The craziest meme that I've heard about Indigo, that it didn't go.
Just one non-empathetic statement by the CEO of Indigo, and then he's completely off the grid.
So then you have to ask yourself, how does the story actually convert itself into action?
If it is something that Indigo had pre-planned, they couldn't have chosen a worse time.
Which is something that can be useful for not just people in the airline sector, but also across other sectors. I think there's enough already said about Indigo and its travails right now, with all the wonderful photos of people stranded at airports and people losing their money and people not meeting their loved ones and so on and so forth. So I don't want to really get into context building on this particular episode. And I think that there have been so many experts on LinkedIn specifically who have been talking about various things around the whole Indigo fiasco or debacle.
Yeah.
There are a lot of conspiracy theories around. I mean, somebody who just said that the whole thing was planned out by Indigo in order to face off the government, right? Because they knew that it was coming for 2 years, but they chose not to do anything about it because they wanted to show the impact of what was happening to the government. So there's this conspiracy theory. The second is obviously Indigo wasn't prepared for this. They have a foreign-based CEO, etc., etc. They have done a lousy job with their apology and advertising and stuff like that. So I thought, Janavi, is there something that we can take away from this specific debacle and kind of use it for founders and CEOs who are not yet facing a crisis, right? Because it is indeed a black swan event. If we dispense with the conspiracy theories or dispense with the way in which they've dealt with it, I think a lot of times most people don't realize that a black swan event is actually around the horizon, and most people don't really recognize that it's going to hit them really badly. So how do you kind of prepare for it, and how do you kind of create a story around it, was what we were talking about right before we started doing this episode, because we wanted to kind of bring out something different, a different angle to the whole thing, which is positive, which is something that can be useful for not just people in the airline sector but also across other sectors. So that's my setup for this particular episode.
Yeah, so let's take the conspiracy for once, right? And
Yeah.
look at the fact. I mean, conspiracy is okay, whether they did it knowingly or unknowingly or whatever, probably knowingly. But the fact remains that DGC had already given the pilot rest norms around 2 years back, right? So, and Indigo has completely failed to, abide by those laws, abide by those norms in these last 2 years. There were, I think, 3 to 4 repeated warnings by DGCA to Indigo and all the airlines to fix their pilot issues, etc. Now, Indigo was facing a lot of attrition these last 2 years, but they failed to hire more people or hire experienced pilots, despite there being a plethora of pilots that had been laid off during the Kingfisher debacle and the Jet Airways debacle. So you can't say there weren't enough experienced pilots out there. But despite that, maybe to cut the costs or whatever the internal stuff was going on with Indigo, they absolutely failed to hire the people enough to abide by DGCA's rest norms for the pilots. So obviously they knew that some crisis was going to hit at some point. It could have been in this December, it could have been a year from now, whatever it might be. They knew the Black Swan event was coming, right? And that is true for, I think, 90% of the crisis that hits any CEO, any company out there. Most of it is either they're doing or has happened somewhere because of the internal ops issues or whatever, but it's there in the pipeline, right? So people know that the Black Swan event is going to hit them. So now the question is, do you just keep throwing it under the rug until it drops dead on your head, or do you do something before so that at least people don't lose the love for you?
Yeah, no, and we spoke about this earlier, and I would love to bring up this example again of Air India and the horrific crash that happened. Right now, here are two airlines, right? And by the way, Air India is not covering itself in glory by raising prices at this stage as well. So I'm not getting into that. But Air India, when it was actually having this moment of crisis, when stuff went horribly wrong because of the air crash that happened and the terrible tragedy that ensued because of it, was able to kind of build up some sort of patriotic image that to fall back upon, which was directly connected to the fact that Ratan Tata is there and the fact that it's India's national carrier and stuff like that, and that kind of held them together. And people kind of said, "Hey, I'm flying Air India again," and stuff like that. Now compare and contrast that with Indigo, and this is where I think the difference is very stark. If you don't kind of invest in your storytelling in moments of peace, if you don't have an iconic leader who's at the forefront of kind of being out there and saying spreading the gospel or whatever it is, you have a situation wherein you're going to not have you're going to not have enough petrol in the tank to actually kind of ride something like this. Now I'm sure that Indigo, being a monopoly and being a commoditized monopoly in that sort of sense, is going to survive. it's going to come back and people will forget it because people need to take flights, people need to go places. And I think that's something that Indigo is probably banking upon
It is, yes.
when something like this has happened. But if I have to take it beyond the typical sector, here's a critical question that every CEO or founder needs to ask themselves, right? And the question is this: I would like negative visualization to happen and actually find out whether any CEO, okay, can actually visualize a very negative outcome for their business and imagining that, like, okay, something hits us terribly, let's say a year down the line or 2 years down the line, and our entire business has collapsed, okay, and it is zero, and people are writing obituaries about it and stuff like that. I think most CEOs, even though they might be aware of things, put stuff under the carpet because they don't want to do this negative visualization. And if I look at the negative visualization from any CEO or founder's perspective, you will suddenly identify at least 4 to 5 risks for any business that can obliterate them overnight. What do you think?
Yeah, that is true. Now, here you brought in the Air India example. The first thing is that after the air crash happened, Air India didn't swipe everything under the rug. They didn't come out with a very templatized statement. They did. They had a template for it, which is your immediate PR go-to stuff that happens, right? But after
Yes.
that, immediately you could see Air India people on the ground doing the investigations. Their CEO was upfront. Tata Group was taking all the responsibility, etc. And then what also helped the Air India crash was that Boeing came into the picture, right? So it wasn't just a nationalistic sentiment because of the Tata Group. It was also because there was another party to blame, and that was a very big party to blame because it already had a lot of closets in its skeleton, and people knew that, right? So even now, despite the fact that no conclusion has been drawn from the investigation, there were a couple of things that were in the pipeline, that were in the circulation among the people, that it might have been a conspiracy against India, it might have been a terrorist attack, it might be Boeing's fault, it might be because of the switch from the government to the Tata Group, right? So there were a number of things that were happening all around, and that is why it was easier to sweep things under the rug. Right now with Indigo, what is happening? Number one, this is the festival season. This is the travel season where either winter vacations are coming up or Christmas is coming up. People are going home, right? So there was already a lot of traffic happening during this time. So number one, the norms came at the kind of time, when the travel was at its peak. So, and if it is something that Indigo had pre-planned, they couldn't have chosen a worst time, right?
So if I have to go back to the Taj example, I believe that they must be having a playbook, right, on what happens if things go wrong. Because if you remember 26/11 and
Yeah,
the Taj Hotel, which was engulfed by terrorists, the way in which the Taj response was terrific. Now,
yeah.
clearly nobody was blaming them at that point in time, but they have probably prepared a playbook for what if things go wrong because they know the hospitality business and they could transfer those learnings as to how do you communicate during a crisis when things go wrong, taking it for granted that things are going to go wrong in a very long life cycle that the company
Yeah.
wishes to hold.
I think Tata has figured out, and major companies have figured out, that communication doesn't just include social media or doesn't just include your PR statements. Communication also includes your actions.
Mm.
After the 26/11 attack, immediately the entire Tata force was on the ground. The Taj Hotel was rebuilt within 1 month. People could see the activities happening. People were compensated for the terrorist losses, etc. Right? Even though at that time the government was not favorable with the Tata Group, the group itself was making numerous efforts to salvage whatever had happened. And obviously it was a terrorist attack, so nobody was going to blame the Tata Group for that. But again, there could have been a lot of backlash related to their security efforts, and Tata didn't know that there were terrorists. I mean, any conspiracy nut would just say that there was some internal help for the terrorists. How can terrorists just enter a hotel lobby and start gunning down everybody, etc.? But everybody could see Tata, especially Ratan Tata, was there on the ground trying to rebuild the Taj Hotel. So they knew that the action was happening. The moment the salvaging action starts happening, it clicks in your subconscious mind that this group is not involved in the problem. Right now,
Yeah.
what is happening with Indigo is Indigo is in a black box. Just one non-empathetic statement by the CEO of Indigo, and then he's completely off the grid. The staff, except those people in the boxes who know absolutely nothing, except the front staff who is facing all the backlash from the furious passengers, right? Except them, nobody on of Indigo is on the ground. Nobody can see anything happening from Indigo. And when government is trying to have talks with Indigo, Indigo is not responding to those talks positively. right?
Yeah.
And that is one of the main reasons. Now this is a lesson for CEOs. You might be very complacent in your company. You might know that your product is a commoditized monopoly in some particular market, so your company might be safe, but does that mean that you are safe? Because yesterday the news has been floating out that the government of India and the board of Indigo is vying for the replacement or removal of the CEO of Indigo, right? So
I think yeah, no, I think that's bound to happen because people want and love to be angry at somebody or something when something like this happens. And I think the point that you're making is absolutely right. And it is sometimes that your story is communicated through your behavior rather than your words, or it's communicated through the actions that you take. And I think this is what the playbook actually needs to have. It of course needs to be connected to some sort of meaning-making metaphor, which the group or the company stands for, but then it has to be translated into words. Now, for this, you definitely need your employees on your side. And I
yeah,
wanted to actually look at two examples internationally, right? Who can actually do something, who can guide CEOs to ward off some, or ward off some sort of situation that happens to them. The first one is Uber. So when Uber was headed by Travis Kalanick, I don't know, I'm not sure about his Kalanick or whatever. People in Uber were led by him. It was all about stepping on toes, hustling, making sure you cut corners and stuff like that. So that story of that culture was translated into employee behavior and even contractual behavior, and that led to Travis having to go, and he was replaced by Dara. Again, the surname is really crazy. Dara had to basically restructure the entire organization based upon a different story, which led to a different culture internally. And I think that is absolutely critical for most companies to understand, that you have to do this negative visualization that I was talking about.
yeah,
And you can't just focus on all the positives and the rah-rah stuff when it comes to employees. So that's one example. The second example that I wanted to speak about was Airbnb. So Airbnb, when it had to lay off a lot of people during COVID, right? Obviously, this was a big disaster for the employees involved, and people were like, spewing stuff about Airbnb on social media. Airbnb came out as transparent. Airbnb came out as humane. Airbnb came out with packages that were very, very generous, and kind of made it into a sort of positive, I might say, because of the whole debacle. And then they have survived this whole scene post COVID. These two examples actually allow you to understand the beauty of actually having a story which is ready with you in a crisis like situation. What do you think?
agreed. And story also comes out through empathy. I'm forgetting the name of the company here. Maybe it was Tesla, or some company of Elon Musk, or some fan company. I'm not sure. But they had to fire off around 10 to 20,000 employees, right? And this happened in US. So there is always a very big uproar when something like this happens. Because employees feel that the rich are still getting their money, etc. So the CEO came and told that I am not debiting even one penny in my salary this time, because I have to
Yeah.
lay off so many employees, right? And that immediately helped again regain the image for the company, that yeah, this was a turbulent time, this was a black swan event. It was, and the CEO is taking a similar kind of hit that everybody else is, right? So this kind of empathetic communication is also in the playbook, right? So your
Yeah.
book, so you're basically, what is your story here, right? What do we mean when we say story? It's not just what goes on your social media. That is the end result of it. Your story is basically your origin. You're spying the values that you hold, that you adhere to,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? So if you're
Absolutely.
very, very clear of about the values that you have, what your vision for your company or your life is, then it becomes very easy to translate them into the execution of that story.
Yeah, no, and just to add to that, see, because it is a commoditized monopoly, that means that you're becoming a very transactional organization.
Yeah,
So there is a great temptation to understand that, oh, these are the facts, these are the sales, this is what our quarterly report is, this is the shareholder value, and that's why we are doing what we are doing. But if you are kind of trying to connect to the humanness behind it, you will soon understand that there is a big difference in just being a commoditized and transactional company, and a company that has a bit of a heart behind it, which definitely helps. If I again look at the Air India crash with the Indigo thing, if I look at Indigo, right, you haven't lost any lives, have you? Right?
no,
So
yeah,
so you haven't lost any lives. But if you would kind of connect, yeah, touch wood, but connecting it to the kind of outrage that you've seen, say, on LinkedIn, and compare it to the outrage that you saw against the Tata Group on LinkedIn for the crash, there were two different things. So
correct.
here you've lost lives, here you've not lost lives.
Yeah,
In fact, I've been very surprised with the emotionality of responses that have come on LinkedIn, which is typically known for, goody goody corporate behavior, wherein people say nice things about each other. To an extent, it's changing quite a bit now, but still, you have emotional responses, because these are the guys, these are business business leaders, these are people in the executive world or whatever, who are directly impacted by a delayed flight. And this is
I think
probably,
I
yeah,
think
go on.
it is not, not just immediate impact. Now, if we look at the Indigo story,
Mm.
since the beginning, since Indigo came into the market, it came as the cheapest flight, which is again
Yes,
transactional. Right.
yes,
It was a very good penetration strategy because in India, the average flight rates were 10,000, 15,000. There was just one major airline,
yes,
which was Air India, which is government operated, and it did not cater to the tier 2, 3 sectors. So Indigo coming into a country where air travel was, not an everyday thing, not an everyman kind of a thing,
yeah,
and a very, very thrifty market. Their strategy was very much on point, right? And
yes,
it served them to a certain degree. Now you've reached the place where there is a very high adoption. You are playing on the volumes game where you are technically the only flight there in the tier 2 and 3 catering to these tier 2, 3, 4 markets. Right now Air India is ramping up, Vistara is ramping up its services in the same markets. They are bringing their price down. So now if you look at it, your story as the cheapest flight is somewhere not holding water, right?
yeah,
Because on an average, if you compare the flight rates of Indigo and Air India and Vistara, there's just a difference of what, 500, 1,000. If I'm already paying 6,000 for a flight, I don't care if it's 6,500 or it's 5,500,
yeah.
right? So your story there is not holding water anymore. So that was the point when Indigo should have shifted their story to be
Hmm.
the beloved flight of India. They tried
I,
to do that with one ad, that musical ad. It was a really good ad, right? People started talking about that ad on LinkedIn a lot. People started vying for Indigo a lot after that piece of communication came. But that never continued. Their
yeah.
story never continued. So
Yeah,
then,
see the
yeah,
yeah, see the reason why it didn't continue was because it was built on conventional brand building lines. See,
mm,
even though it was a beautiful ad, it was still an ad. So ads have a shelf life.
yeah,
And Janavi, the point that you made, which was so critical, that every story is connected to values. And I think that the most important thing when CEOs have to consider when they're building a story, especially for crisis moments, is how does it connect to my values?
yeah,
What are my values? And I think that's a great starting point for any CEO for his or her own legacy, as well as the company, to actually start at the values and then convert that into stories. So then you have to ask yourself, how does the story actually convert itself into action? What empowerment am I going to give to my employees? What empowerment am I going to give to my marketing head? What empowerment am I going to give to other stakeholders who can create a good coherent narrative that can beat all the backlash that I'm getting at this unfortunate time? I
yeah,
think the critical aspect is a lot of CEOs probably is they look at the scenarios, the risk assessment scenarios. I'm sure a lot of consultancy firms make a lot of money for it. What happens is that they look at it, but they don't actually add the story angle to it. What
hmm,
they're doing is they're saying, okay, we will do this, we will do that, and probably something that Indigo didn't do or was staying away from. But there are a lot of actions that you take from a risk assessment perspective, and you kind of plan for it. But perhaps what you're not planning for strongly enough is your story and how it connects to your values and how it will actually, come forth. It's the fire drill that never took place.
that is true. That is true. Now, if you look at the other airlines, now Kingfisher before the whole debacle and everything, the
Yeah.
pilots were very happy with Kingfisher,
Yes.
which helped it sustain before that
Yes.
everything happened, right? The same way, Air India pilots, they were very happy with the company. They were happy with the salaries that they were getting. They were happy to be a part of the government group or the
Yeah.
Tata group and all of that stuff, right? Now, Indigo, for the pilots, every Indigo pilot I've ever met in my life, or people who are either married to Indigo pilots or know Indigo pilots, etc., say the one thing: they don't get paid enough, they don't get good leaves, they don't get many
Yeah.
perks that people in
Yeah.
air get. Now, the problem is these things tend to trickle out, right? It
Yeah.
is a domino effect. In the
Yes.
market, it is already out there that the employees of Indigo are getting violated,
Yes.
and which is why
Absolutely.
there is love lost in platforms like LinkedIn for
Yes.
Indigo long before the Black Swan event hits, because
Yes.
it does not relate to your values. Now, why
Yes.
why Air India did not face that kind of a backlash as it should have after losing 280 lives, right? Because there was an inherent love for the Tata Group.
Yes.
There has always been an absolute faith in Ratan Tata, and since the transition was very, very recent to Noel Tata, there was still a sort of inherent faith that maybe, just maybe, Noel Tata is having the same kind of values that Ratan Tata had, and so we will not blame Air India to that level, to that
Yeah.
extent,
So
right?
yeah, no, I completely agree. And I was just thinking, okay, so we've spoken a bit, and hopefully we've added to rather than added to the clarity rather than the noise around this. I was wondering what takeaways or what insights or what lessons can a CEO or founder actually have. One of the first lessons that I thought of was, okay, it you need to have definitely a plan for a crisis moment. You need to understand how your business can be obliterated, and a lot of people stay away from negative visualization. Even if you do that negative visualization and you plan for crisis moments, you're still not probably planning for your story. And the third point that you made about values then kicks in. What do you think?
Yeah, one is so my takeaway is don't get complacent, right? Now, Indigo is a perfect example of scaling from 0 to 1 to 1 to 10. Till 0 to 1, there was a there was a good strategy, there was a good communication, there was a even transaction was their playbook. It was transactional behavior was their was their communication strategy. It was very much on point. Kudos to that. Right now, they made a mistake from 1 to 10 because they got complacent that Indigo holds 60% of the market share in India, right?
Yeah.
Now any legacy company, you have to understand this, bithalo apne mind mein that companies are cropping up left, right, and center. Today SpiceJet obviously does not have a great fleet, but if SpiceJet or any new say Fly 99 or Go Air or any kind of a startup kind of a company says, okay, Indigo is already going under, let us take a risk and just throw ourselves out there, it will become very easy for them to beat Indigo at their own game.
Lovely.
Right?
And I think,
market share goes down because love is lost for you. Nobody is going to cantanker for you now. They would be very much willing to give somebody else a chance. And second takeaway is don't get complacent about the market. Understand the cultural shift of the market that you are catering to. Now Indigo got very, very complacent about the thriftiness of the Indian market. Ki sasta hai, de do inko, and they will they will come to us no matter what, because they don't have any other option, right?
Yes.
The cultural shift that is happening in India, there is a lot of pro-nationalism. You are daring to go against one of the largest economies in the world, where people are every single day feeling more and more empowered.
Yes.
So they don't give a damn if you are giving 1,000 rupees off.
Yeah, just because you're transactional as a culture doesn't mean that you're emotional. And I think
Exactly.
India is a culture that kind of embraces both, isn't it?
Exactly.
I think that is absolutely missed by a lot of
And that is
companies.
given in the exact completely unempathetic statement given by the CEO of Indigo. It was like, I don't give a damn, you need me, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what his statement said.
That's the residue. That's the residue. So final lesson from my side is make sure that you have your story ready before the black swan appears or before something hits the fan. I think that's absolutely
Make
critical.
sure that your story is ready. Make sure that it resonates with the inherent core values that you have. Even if those values are completely transactional, then make sure that your story reflects it, right? So that at least that niche is glued into your story, right? And that story then has to translate into every communication that you do, be it through social media, be it through content or PR activities, or be it through the communication through action. Your story has to translate from point zero of values and mission vision to the point Z of your actual social media execution.
Wonderful. Let's stop here.